Welcome to the Fathering Strong podcast, where we celebrate the incredible journeys of fathers who are making a difference. Hosted by Urban Light Ministry President and author, Pastor Eli Williams. Each week, we'll hear from an inspiring guest who will share their unique fatherhood story. We'll discuss the challenges, triumphs, and lessons learned along the way, offering valuable insights and encouragement for all dads. Join us as we explore the power of fatherhood and build a brighter future for our families.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Fathering Strong podcast. I'm Bruce Stapleton, sitting in this week for Pastor Eli. In today's episode of the Fathering Strong podcast, we're going to welcome Buddy Brown, a Springfield father whose story will challenge everything you believe about forgiveness, redemption, and the power of intentional fatherhood. From the darkest moments that nearly claimed his life to discoveries that completely transformed his approach to raising children, Buddy's journey reveals surprising truths about what it really takes to become the father you never had. Whether you're struggling with your own painful past or simply want to be more intentional with your children, this conversation will lead you with practical tools and renewed hope. You won't want to miss where this story goes. So let's welcome to the podcast, Buddy Brown.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so glad you're here. I read your story as you wrote it on Fathering Strong. You're one of our new dads on Fathering Strong the last couple of weeks, one of our 340 dads we've got online now, and just really liked hearing your story. Sounded like you'd had some trauma growing up and, got a family of your own now, and sounds like you've really, accepted the Lord and have done some major changes in your life to really become a better dad. And we'd just like to hear your story. I know a lot of people that are listening today will really be inspired about what you've done. So that's how we like to start. Just tell us a little bit about you growing up as little Buddy Brown in the family, and what your relationship was with your dad.
So, anyone who grows up in like dysfunction and trauma, it becomes really easy to focus on that portion of it. And then after yesterday, as I was praying through this, and I asked God to help me really do justice to him and to my father. And early on, I had a good relationship with my dad. The first 6 to 8 years, we were the typical American family. Mom and dad both worked, bought a house, had some kids, had some dogs, and everything was going well. And I remember idolizing my dad a little bit when I was little, because he was a great hunter, mainly like squirrels and rabbits, but he was an excellent shot. His brother was an excellent shot. And just everything my dad did, it was real manly, really macho stuff. I wanted to be like him. He had a little routine he did every Saturday morning where he would go and meet with friends and do things. And I loved going with him because he always stopped at Lawson's and would buy me a hot chocolate and a donut and that kind of thing. And so I really liked being with my dad at that time. Unfortunately, shortly after they bought the house, I think he was dealing with some trauma from Vietnam. And so that a lot of that, I wake up in the middle of the night and hear mom and dad arguing quite a bit. And I would sneak to the stairs to try to figure out what was going on. And a lot of it had to do with just things that happened before and after Vietnam and during and all that. And so he started like self-medicating and started drinking, and then that became more and more. When he was sober, he was very loving, kind, gentle, those kinds of things. But once he was drunk, he was a different man, totally angry all the time, that kind of thing. He started having affairs when I was 10. My mom found out about it. And shortly after that, the big fight broke out during my birthday. Mom lit the candles, and then in the middle of me waiting to make my wish and blow out candles, a big fight breaks out, and dad moves out. Mm. And so he left us fatherless, moved in with his girlfriend, had 2 kids. And then when I was 13, he moved back in and left that family fatherless and, to move back in with us. And I made it clear to him that he used to beat my mom before he moved out. And just because he was moving back in didn't mean that was going to start again. That she hadn't been hurt by a man since he left, and it wasn't going to start because he was coming back. And I'm not going to go into graphic detail, but I woke him up one night standing over him with a ball bat after he had beat my mom that day. And I made him aware that would be the last time. And it was. But so very quickly, I started wanting nothing to be like my father. He always kind of made my brother and I feel like we were obstacles to him enjoying his life. We were, just something in his way, that kind of thing. And so, one time when I was 14, I came home from school and I asked my dad, I said, "Hey, the guys want to go play football. Can I go play?" And he says, "No, we got to split this firewood and get it ready for the winter." And he says, "It's not going to split itself." Well, I didn't have a phone, so I couldn't call them and tell them I couldn't go. They showed up with the football, and I should have just told them I couldn't go. But I looked at my dad sympathetically, hoping he would say, "I'll go ahead and play. We'll split this wood another day." And he became very angry and wanted to know why I was looking at him when he had already answered my question and all this stuff, and wanted to know why they were there. And when I stated, "Well, there's no way for me to communicate with them. We don't have a phone," he took that as talking back, and he put me up against the house and just started wailing on me with his fists in front of my friends. It was very embarrassing. And so he said, "Well, quit your crying, going in the house. You ain't man enough to split wood anyway." So I go in the house, and I'm going somewhere with this. I went to the gun cabinet and got my shotgun and loaded it, and I went into my bedroom. And I pondered whether it was better to put it against my forehead or in my mouth. And I heard this, like, it wasn't me thinking it, but I heard a voice that said, "You can't do this. If you do this, who's going to protect your mom and your brother?" And so I unloaded the gun, I put it back in the cabinet, and at that point, we had never been to church. But I believed that there was a God. When we were little, Mom would say our bedside prayers with us and that kind of thing. I believed that we were created, but I had never talked to God. And I laid on my bed and I stared at the ceiling. And I said, is this how it's supposed to be? Is this as good as it gets? Because I don't want this. This is horrible. And a short time after that, my mom ran into a man who helped raise her for a couple of years after her parents died. And she used to go to church with him. And he asked her where she was going to church, and she said nowhere. And so he invited her to High Street Nazarene. And so we went. And Bruce, I can't tell you what that pastor preached on that first Sunday, but I can tell you I sat in that congregation and I watched every man in that room. And I saw men putting their arms around their wives like they adored them, like they loved them. And then after church, I saw men hugging their kids and, eagerly anxious to hear what their kids did in Sunday school and treating them like the treasures they are and not like a nuisance or like some kind of obstacle in their life. And I remember thinking that day, I don't know what they have, but I want it. And I know now that was a relationship with Christ, but even more so, I wanted the healthy marriage. I wanted the healthy relationship with his kids and all that kind of stuff. And that's really where my journey started, wanting to break the chain of dysfunction in my family. And that's kind of where I started looking at how I wanted to be a father.
Wow. That's impactful. That's a great story. You talked about a brother. Did you have other siblings or just one brother?
I have a half brother and a half sister from that first affair that my dad had.
Okay. I didn't know if you were it sounded like you were the protector of the family. It sounded like from your dad there.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, he moved back in because the night before he moved back in, we had an intruder enter our house. And he was actually after our neighbor, but he had the wrong address. And I fought him off with a ball bat and threatened him. I got the shotgun and threatened that if he came back in the house, I'd have to shoot him. And so my mom laid it on thick to my dad that it's sad that your 13-year-old son has to be the man of the house because the man of the house is absent.
Well,
So he was present in our house, but left another house without a dad.
well, yeah, and I think you mentioned to those step brother and sister you had, they moved in with you?
Yeah, my mom, well, they live with their mom, but my mom, being a Christian woman, she felt like it wasn't their fault. They didn't ask to be brought into the situation. So she loved them like they were her own. And she, did the best she could she took them to church every Sunday and all that kind of stuff. And, just really loved on them every chance she got. And, to this day, they still call her mom. But I tell you, Bruce, I had so many men, in that church that didn't try to change me. They didn't try to make me unpoor. They didn't try to make me, be someone else. They just loved me right where I was at. I remember a man by the name of Earl Perry. He, came to me one Sunday after church and he says, "Hey, what are you doing next Saturday?" And I said, "Well, I don't know why." And he says, "Well, they got this father-son shindig over at the park that the church is having." He said, "My sons are grown and have families of their own. And I kind of want to go, but I don't want to look like a nerd being there without a kid." He said, "Would you mind going with me so I don't look weird?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And at the time I thought I was doing this older man a favor. And, now with hindsight, I can look back and see, no, he was doing me a favor.
Right.
He saw a woman bringing her kids to church by herself, and he saw a teenage boy that probably needed some mentorship. And, he did that. And there were so many men, Dave Mowdy, Gary Durst, a bunch of different men, really poured into me. And, again, never with expectations. I always joke and say that I kind of crowd surfed. If you've ever seen someone crowd surf at a concert,
Yeah,
it's kind of like a group of men would take me from the time I was 13 until I was 15, and another group of men would pass me on to the next group. And even today, Marty's one of those men that is in my life that's helping me strive to become a better father and a better husband.
That's awesome. Yeah. So it really sounds like you really, got a lot of mentorship through the church, and it sounds like that's some of the things you needed that you were missing out of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I tell you, one of the things that went through my head is obviously, my wife and I got married, and, I was in the Marine Corps and we were down in North Carolina. We had no support system. It was just her and I down there, and we got pregnant, and, we were so excited to be able to, start a family. But in the back of my head, I was concerned that will I do this wrong like my dad did? And I was adamant that I wouldn't, but at the same time, I didn't believe that he intentionally set out to be the kind of father that he was. And so I had some anxiety and stuff. And at the time, I had put in re-enlistment papers to stay in the Marine Corps. And once my daughter was born, we were there at the hospital, and it was like that third day when their eyes are open a lot more. And I was holding her in my hands, and she was staring at my face. And my wife looked up, and I had tears running down my cheeks. And my wife said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I can't do this." And she said, "Can't do what?" And I said, "I can't re-enlist." I said, "I'm not going to watch her grow up in pictures." And I told her, I said, "I feel so blessed that I'm embarrassed. I don't deserve to have a perfectly healthy child and all this stuff." And I felt so blessed to have a wife and the child that I had. And so it was funny. I was the colonel's driver, and he called me into his office because I had this stellar career going. I had been meritoriously promoted and stuff. And he goes, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to do this anymore." He said, "What changed?" And I said, I had a baby. He goes, there's a lot of people that have babies. I said, yeah, but I just want to be there to tuck her in every night. I want to see her every day. I want to be there when she comes home from school and show me her papers and that kind of stuff. And so, she's 30 now.
Wow. Yeah.
And then
Congratulations. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And then, we had twins 19 years ago, all girls. And that was something else. I was always a little bit nervous about having a boy because, I would want to make him tough and make him, manly, but at the same time, let him know that I loved him and be gentle with him. And I didn't know how I would marry those two worlds. And so I was quite thankful to have girls because girls are supposed to be soft and you can, just pamper them and make them like princesses and all that kind of stuff. And, I definitely believe God knew what he was doing when he made me a girl dad.
Yeah. So what was it like being a girl dad? Because like you said, it is different than bringing up men. We usually talk, get into the podcast here, talk about, how you felt being a father, and you pretty much expressed that, I think, pretty well. So, I mean, what was it like being a girl dad and trying to, raise, sounds like three different girls at sort of different age groups there?
Well, it's funny because, when Chelsea, my oldest, she wanted me to play Barbies one time. And, I said, well, we can't do that today. And she said, why? I said, because you don't have a Ken doll and I'm not going to pretend to be a girl. So she and I made a trip to Walmart and I bought a Ken doll so I could, try to establish to her that, there's a God created a man and a woman.
Right.
And all that kind of stuff. And, so it was good. I treated my daughter, my wife always says that I treated the oldest like the son I never had. We wrestled a lot. I took her to the Home Depot kids workshop and we built stuff together and all that kind of stuff. And she's always been a little bit more rugged than the other two. When the twins came along, my wife was like, you're not turning them into boys like you did Chelsea. And, but every child is different. Every child has a different love language.
Yep.
That's probably one of the best classes I ever took, at High Street. We had a pastor at the time, Dave Ringheiser, who, was our Sunday school teacher. And then, John and Deb Patton took that class over, and John and Deb geared it more towards couples and being parents and that kind of stuff. And, they taught us the 5 love languages. And a lot of people think that's just for your spouse. But when you learn the 5 basic love languages that people feel loved, you become more intentional to figure out what every person in your life's love language is so that you can speak love to them. And I remember very specifically when my twins were very little, every time I came in the door from work, Luke Combs has a song called Front Door Famous. And I was front door famous. And every time I came home, they would both come running and hug me and kiss me. But then I quickly realized the middle daughter was doing it because the younger daughter did it.
Okay. Right.
And it wasn't her natural thing to do, but she was doing it because that's what the other one was doing. So I started watching them more closely. And Kara, the youngest, would always be like, Daddy, will you color with me? And I said, sure. And I got down on the floor and I was coloring with her. And when I tried to color with Krista turned her coloring book away from me as if I didn't ask you to do that.
Right.
And so then I'm like, okay, quality time is not hers and physical touch is not hers. And then one day I scolded them because they had made a big mess or something. And Kara was like, okay, Dad, I'm sorry. And then Krista melted down. And I was like, it's words of affirmation. And so I very quickly learned that if I want to connect with her, if I want to get through to her, I can't scold her because she's going to put her defensive walls up and I'm not getting through.
Right.
But if I got down on one knee and if I said, sweetheart, come here for a second. When you do this, this makes me angry. And neither of us like it when I'm angry. So will you please stop doing that? And then she'd go, okay, Daddy. And so understanding what your kids' love languages are really helps you not only love them best, but also the opposite of love is hate or dislike. And so if you're speaking the opposite of their love language, they're going to feel like you don't like them or love them.
Right.
And so that's probably one of the greatest tools I picked up as a father is just that 5 love languages.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, that I'm so glad you picked that up because it sounds like you really became more intentional with each one of them. And those are probably some really good questions to ask their future husbands if they know what their love language is.
Well, the funny thing is, my oldest daughter, she requested that her husband do it with her after they got married. And then Krista, the middle daughter, she has already taken that with her boyfriend. And so it's so cool to see teenagers. They're 19 now, but it's so cool to see teenagers picking up tools and learning things that I didn't learn until I was in my 30s.
Right. Well, but see, the thing is, you taught them those kind of learning skills to want to learn those things as a father. So, I mean, that's one of the biggest things about being a girl dad is, the girls seeing you, what they want to see in future future husbands. And it just sounds like, you did all the right things. So you should be proud of yourself. You did a great job.
Well, I am to an extent, Bruce, but the fact of the matter is, I've dropped the ball a few times as a father. And that's the tricky thing is, I've always said that a man's heart is like a throne, and there's only one person that can sit on that throne, and it's either Jesus or it's me. And so when I push Jesus off the throne by making other things more important than him, I can become very selfish. I can become very self-focused and just very, and then once that weed starts growing in the heart, it can very quickly become overgrown. And there's been some times where I have forsaken my first love in Christ and not been the father that I should have, not been the spiritual leader in the home that I should have. I don't want to be fake. I don't want to paint some rosy picture here and put me on a pedestal, because at the end of the day, it's all about Jesus. So I cried out to God that first time I told you earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And then, oh boy, for years, I tried to forgive my dad. I kept hearing sermons, that if you want God to forgive you, you got to forgive others. And one time I was at the altar, the pastor had preached a message on that. And this much older man came down to the altar and he says, "How can I pray with you?" And I said, "Well, I need to forgive my dad, but I can't figure out how." And he said, "Well, he's telling me about it." So I told him a little bit about it. And he said, "The problem is," he said, you're looking at your dad with the wrong eyes." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you're looking at him with your eyes. And as long as you look at him with your eyes, you're never going to see anything but his sin and the things that he did wrong." He said, "Maybe you should start asking God to help you see him with God's eyes, because then you'll see that, like you, he's a sinful man in need of grace." And so I started praying that almost daily, that God would help me see my dad the way he did, because I wanted to forgive him. The problem is when a person who has hurt you is still living and he's still hurting you, it's hard to get past forgiving the past when he's still doing things in the present.
Right.
And when the girls were 8, Kara said, "Dad, why don't I know your dad better?" Then I said, "Well, it's because he's made choices and he lives a lifestyle that I don't want to subject you to." And she's like, "Well, I want to know him better. And Grandma said he likes to fish. So can we take him fishing?" And I said, "Kara, I really don't think you understand what you're asking." And she goes, "Yeah, I do. I'm asking you if we could take my grandpa fishing." And so I called him up and he had quit driving at that point because he had gotten so many DUIs. It was easier to quit driving than quit drinking. And he said that he couldn't even afford a fishing license. And I said, "Well, I'll buy you the fishing license. I'll buy the bait. I'll pick you up. if you'll just go with us. And so he did. And we go out there, and I'm watching him bait my girls' hooks, and he's joking around and making little quirky jokes with them and stuff, and they're laughing. And I'm in my head, I'm like, you have no idea who this guy is.
Right.
And I became so angry.
Mm.
And I had to walk halfway around the pond, Bruce. And I'm over there, and I'm angry casting my line. And I'm like, look at him over there, acting as if nothing ever happened. And so I renewed my conversation with my dad about God. And I said, how could you give me a father like that? And this is what in the Fathering Strong post that I made, I had a Job moment. And God said, okay, you had Dave Mowdy. You had Gary Durst. You had Jim Yoakum. You had all these men that showed you how to be a good father and a good husband. Who did he have?
Right.
And so when I started looking at my grandfather and my great uncles and all that stuff, I could see that my dad just followed the path that was blazed before him.
Right. Yeah.
And so I really felt like the Holy Spirit said, he needs grace just as much as you did. You know, you're not special. You're not, you're not any better than him. And I always said that my heart was like a bathtub full of anger. And that day, God pulled the plug.
Yeah.
And so we take him home. And by the end of the fishing day, he had learned which girl was which, because they're twins. And he had learned to tell them apart. And I took him home and I walked him up to the porch. And I said, Dad, I just want you to know I forgive you. He said, well, like, for what? And I was like, wow, if I have to explain to you the things I'm forgiving you for, I'm going to have one more thing to forgive you for. So let's just say everything I feel like you did wrong in my life, whether it was wrong or just wrong in my eyes, I forgive you for it. And he said, well, that's awesome, son, but why would you do that? I said, because Jesus did it for me. Before I even asked, Jesus provided a way for me to be forgiven. And so that was August of 2014.
Mm.
He came to our house that Christmas to watch my girls open their gifts from their grandmother and other people. And he didn't look well. Then I asked him, I said, Dad, are you all right? And he said, I don't feel real good anymore. And he looked jaundiced. He looked swollen. And then I made a conscious effort to call him weekly to ask him how he was doing and talk to him. And in April, I got a call one morning from a doctor at the hospital asking me if I knew that my father was in the hospital. And I said, no. I said, how long has he been in there? I said, since Friday.
Mm.
And I said, well, what's wrong with him? He said, what's not wrong with him? He said his kidneys are shutting down, his liver's shutting down, he's in congestive heart failure, he's got pneumonia. He's gained over 100 pounds of water weight from his last doctor's appointment. So I went to see him, and he was unconscious. They had him sedated and had him intubated. And I found myself sitting on the couch, begging God to give him a moment. Begging God to give me an opportunity to share the gospel with him. And when I got done praying, I looked up and he was staring at me. And my dad had these steel blue eyes. And he was staring at me and tears running down his cheeks. And he was trying to talk, but he couldn't because he was intubated. And I told him, I said, Dad, I can only imagine what you're trying to say. I just want you to know it doesn't matter. All right? We love you. We forgive you. And we just want you to get better. And so he was in that condition for about 10 days. And it got to the point that we were going to have to put in a feeding tube and a tracheotomy or let him go. And he was following the commands of the nurses, squeezing their hands and all this stuff. And I told him, I said, Dad, I said he can make his own decision. And they said, well, as long as he understands what he's saying. And so my wife and I went in there the night before he passed, and they took him off sedation. He woke up, and my wife made a reference to an inside family joke, and he belly laughed. And the nurse was convinced that he was coherent enough to make his own decision. And he chose to just say our goodbyes. He chose not to do the trach and the feeding tube. And I said, Dad, I said, can you look at me? And he did. And I said, I've never forced my faith on you, and I'm not going to start now. But the fact of the matter is, we're all going to meet God face to face sooner or later. And in your shoes, it's going to be sooner than later. And if I was in your shoes, I'd want to know what God's going to say. And the good news for you is you don't have to wait until you're in front of him to find out. You can make a decision today, and you can ask him to forgive you today and know that he's going to say all is good and you can enter heaven. And I said, but you have to want it. It's not going to do you any good to do it to make me feel better. You know,
Right.
you have to want it. And he nodded that he wanted me to pray with him. And so my wife and I led him in the Lord's Prayer, and he got saved that night. And
That's amazing.
my wife and I was walking down the hallway leaving, and the nurse, the whole time I was talking to him and praying with him, the nurse was, I could just hear tissue after tissue coming out of the box. She was sobbing. And I turned around and I told her, I said, I think it's your turn, because she had to confirm his decision. And she said, you suck. And I said, why do I suck? And she said, I have to talk to this man, and you have me a sobbing mess. And so as my wife and I left, she called out to us, and she caught up with me, and she said, I want you to know I've been a nurse for close to 30 years. She said, that's the most beautiful father-son moment I've ever seen in my life. And I said, Cindy, if you knew my father and I's history, you would have no doubt that there's a God in heaven, because under my own strength and under my own power, the only thing I could do was hate that man. But God gave me a love for him that not only helped me forgive him, but wanted to see him in heaven. And she said, well, I haven't been to church in over 20 years, but I'm going to find one Sunday morning. I said, Cindy, that would make all the pain I went through worth it.
Wow.
And so my girls were grateful that they got to meet their grandfather on that day and spend some time with him. It's the best ending to a sad story. But you had asked me earlier, like what I have done to try to help other young men and that kind of thing. I was a youth leader in North Carolina when we were down there in the church there, working with those teens. I ran an open gym at our church for a while for some of the inner city youth to have a place to go on a Tuesday night to play some basketball and hear the word. I teach a Sunday school class now, but I think the biggest thing I can do is I just look for young men around me that God brings into my circle. Primarily my son-in-law. He's now a father, and I've had some open conversations with him about how when I was his age and had my firstborn child, I wasn't the father I wanted to be. I wasn't the father that I needed to be. And I want to help him avoid some of the pitfalls that I fell into. And I feel like he's already on a much better path, because he's already taken the 5 love language class, and he's already, like me, he had a rough relationship with his father. And so he's told me on multiple occasions that I'm the dad that he always wanted, that kind of thing. And then I'm establishing a really good relationship with the young man that I think is going to marry my middle daughter. And he's let me know how I've mentored him and stuff and along the way as well. But I think as far as the advice piece,
Well, let's just take a quick break. Let's sort of we can unpack that here in just a second, but I think
Sure.
we need to take a break after your story, because wow, I just got to say, you've the things that you've gone through and how intentional you've been throughout the whole process is got to be an inspiration for anybody who's listening today. That you know, that God is the true Father. I mean, I think you've made that perfectly clear, and you've got to understand that. So let's just take a quick break, and we'll be back here and to continue the story with Buddy Brown as we look at Fathering Strong podcast today. We'll be back in just a minute. Every father faces a crucial question. How do I become the dad my children truly need? I'm Bruce Stapleton, and my new book, Fathering Strong, God's Blueprint for Leading Your Family, offers the guidance you've been searching for. Drawing from scripture and real-life experiences, this book provides practical wisdom for fathers at every stage, from cradling a newborn to connecting with adult children. Discover how to build a legacy of faith, courage, and love through authentic fatherhood. Available now where books are sold. All right, welcome back to the Fathering Strong podcast. We're here today with Buddy Brown, listening to his impactful story and how he grew up with his father and the things that he did through learning from different mentors and being a dad himself. And it sounds like from our last conversation here a minute ago, he's a grandfather. So what's it like to be a grandfather, and what advice would you give these guys going forward?
Just make yourself available as often as you can. I think that's the tricky part for me is I want to be in her life every day, and I don't want to overstay my welcome. I don't want to become the nuisance to my kid, and her husband. But I've made it clear to them that I want to be as involved as they'll let me. And my daughter works as a nurse from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. and her husband gets up at 4 a.m. to go to work. So I go over and I spend the night, and I get up at 4 a.m. when he goes to work, and I feed her and change her and spend some time with her and then put her down, and I go back to bed. And then once my daughter gets home and showers and they lay down to take a nap together, I leave for work. But I think the biggest thing is I just want to be as much like Jesus as I can in her life, and just continue to point her towards him. You mentioned God being a heavenly father. I failed to mention I had a really tough time when I first became a believer, seeing God as a loving heavenly father. I told a good mentor friend of mine, I was having trouble praying. And he says, well, why? And I said, I just don't know what to say. I feel like, because my dad criticized me all the time. You're never going to be anything. You're never going to be good enough. You're never going to amount to anything, all that kind of stuff. And I said, I just feel like God's kind of, God's just waiting for me to die so he could tell me all the ways I screwed up in life and all this stuff. And he says, you got the wrong image of God. And so through building our friendship, he learned a lot more about me. And he said, God's not your dad, right? You got to get past that. And so it took me a long time, but I eventually was, through the love that I received from these godly men in our church, I was able to eventually see that God is a loving father who sent his son to pay the price for my sin. But yeah.
So what would your advice be to someone who's, in a similar situation to how you grew up, whether maybe they didn't have a dad, or, they had a dad who was not what they wanted to be? I mean, it sounds like you definitely went through a lot of different traumas and overcame a lot of different things, it sounds like. And I mean, what would be sort of the advice you'd give to someone who is in that same kind of situation right now, going through the struggles that you went through?
Do what I did. Find some godly men who are willing to invest some time in it. I had a prayer breakfast at church one time, and I was just trying to get the men's ministry started up. And I said, listen, and I did a little skit, and I brought a toolbox in, and I said, this is the toolbox I left home with. And the toolbox that you leave home with is all the tools your dad taught you on how to be a husband and a father and all this stuff. And I opened it up, and it was primarily empty. It had a hammer and a screwdriver. I said, I know two things. You're gonna beat some stuff up, and you're gonna screw some stuff up if you leave home with the kind of tools I had. I said, but we can do one of two things. We can make excuses for why we have limited tools, or we can start acquiring tools. And the way that we acquire tools is by hanging around men who are better than us. Find men who are more, more mature in their relationship with God, and start spending time with it. Because here's the thing, Bruce, I could come to you and I said, tell me something profound to help me become a better father. And it would be really difficult because it's putting you on the spot to say something profound, right? But if you and I just spend time together and I see how you father your kids, and then I see another godly man who's fathering his kids, and then you're just kind of, ooh, I love what he did there. I love how he talks to his kids. Oh, I love how he plays with his kids. And you can just pick up tools without anybody feeling any pressure, anybody feeling any kind of, they don't feel weird that you're asking them for advice, but just spending time together. Whether that be, at church, after church fellowship, whatever. But show me your friends and you'll show me who you are, right? And so if you're surrounding yourself with people who aren't good dads, there's a high likelihood that you're not going to become the dad that you really want to become. So that would be first and foremost is just surrounding. But the biggest thing is just wanting. I tell my son-in-law this all the time. He's worried he's going to turn into the dad that he had. And I'm like, wanting to be a good dad is 90% of it. The other 10% is showing up. Just be there. When your kid asks you to color with them, no matter how busy you are, they're not asking for 4 hours. Get down on that floor and color with them for 5 minutes. In your head it's going to be 5 minutes. They don't. And what they will know is that you made time for them when they asked. And the little things, when they're teenagers, listen to them. I have a bad habit of wanting to fix things. When my kids or my wife vent to me, I assume they came to me for the solution. I assume they came to me to fix it. Sometimes they just want to vent. And I've got to get better at just hearing them out, saying, okay, so what I hear you saying is that this, and this. Are you asking me for advice, or are you just needing to talk to someone?
Right.
I don't do that enough. I offer unsolicited advice way too much.
I think most of us as men do that all the time. I know I have that same problem that my wife keeps telling me, all your kid want to do is talk to you and want you to listen. They weren't looking for advice. So yeah,
Right.
It's always something. So we talked earlier, before we got on the podcast, we were talking about the church and how we're looking at fatherhood programs in the church. What's your church doing in that space? It sounds like they already had a lot of programs in place with the mentors that took you under their arms and things. I mean, what do you think as far as the importance of having a fatherhood program in the church, and what's your church looking to do with that?
Well, to be honest with you, Bruce, those mentoring things, those weren't programs. That's the beauty of it.
Right.
Those were just godly men seeing a need and jumping on it. I think sometimes those organic things are more impactful than knowing that you were the benefit of a program, and that kind of thing. But I do think if you want something to last, it's got to be organized and it's got to have some some format to it. And that's where I think programs do very, very well. Eli came to our church and preached a few weeks ago, and just kind of, I loved what he had to say about how if we want our city and our country and our state to be better, our homes got to get better. And the way
Right.
homes get better is dads being more intentional about being dads.
Exactly.
And so all I know at this point is that our church is wanting to start a fathering ministry. They have a guy or two that they've already kind of reached out to get that ball rolling. Not sure what that's going to look like. I would love to, I used to love going to Promise Keepers and all that kind of stuff. And I would love to have something, whether that be quarterly or whatever, like a big group get together. But in the meantime, in between the quarterly ones, I would love if, we had like, bi-weekly or monthly get-togethers in smaller groups and then bring them together in bigger groups.
Yeah.
Something like
Well,
that. No idea what
that's
it's going to look like.
And that's what we're trying to do with the Fathering Strong app as well, is bring dads together, even if they don't live in the same community. And one of the things we're looking to do is to put together a conference, where people can come together, sort of like a Promise Keepers, if you will. And you can bring people from all around the U.S. But I mean, it sounds like the church already had, whether it was an established program, but they had a way to get fathers to mentor other dads, which a lot of it could be, organic, but I mean, it's still an important piece, and that doesn't happen in every church for any
Right.
stretch of the imagination. And that's why trying to build those ministries. And I think Marty, your pastor is really on top of that, and understands it, and really sees the importance of it, which, I think is impactful. But well, it looks like we're running out of a little time. I tell you what, your story was amazing, and I think it should inspire a lot of dads out there, or maybe even guys who aren't dads yet, of what they can look forward to if they, understand that God is the true Father, and there is hope out there. And I think your story really shows that, the things that you went through. So I really appreciate you being
Thank you.
vulnerable and sharing that with us today, because and I hope we can get you involved, in the program at your church, and maybe even some things in the Fathering Strong app. I mean, we're trying to build sort of a network program where we can bring dads together, and, with experience like you have, to help, these young fathers understand, there is a way that they can be a better father to, their sons and daughters. And a lot of the tips that you gave them in regards to the love languages, I think was right on point, that they need to understand that, as they're raising their kids. So I appreciate your time today.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you, Bruce, and I appreciate what you and Eli are trying to do to really just help our one father at a time, but our community as a whole.
Absolutely. And really, I think, as we get this going on in your church, and as, you're becoming involved in that, we'd love to get you back on again, on another podcast episode, to just talk about maybe how things have happened through the process, and, what you've learned, and how you've, the nice thing is we'll bring you on as a mentor now about how you've helped these other men. And, maybe we can get some of the guys you've mentored on the podcast as well, to show how it's sort of paying it forward really is what it's all about. So.
Sure. Sounds great.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for being on the Fathering Strong podcast. But with Buddy Brown today, we really appreciate his time. Next week, hopefully we'll get Eli back again for our next guest. But thanks again for all those listening. And once again, thanks for being and listening to the Fathering Strong podcast this week. Take care.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Fathering Strong podcast. We hope you found the conversation inspiring and helpful. To make sure you don't miss out on future episodes, subscribe to the Fathering Strong podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Just search for Fathering Strong in your favorite app. The Fathering Strong podcast is brought to you by Urban Light Ministries, a nonprofit organization with a 3-decade legacy dedicated to turning the hearts of fathers to their children. Thanks to your support, we're able to keep this podcast and many other resources free for dads everywhere. To learn more about Urban Light Ministries, or to donate and help us continue this important work, visit urbanlight.org. The Fathering Strong podcast is a production of Urban Light Ministries. Eli Williams is your host, and Bruce Stapleton of the Momentum Group is the producer and engineer. Our theme music is provided by saxophonist Harold Rayford.